All right, guys. So again, another unorthodox attack. And I would say, like, obviously you're a wrestler, you're looking at that, you're like, what the fuck is that? And you wouldn't be wrong with that, right? But let's talk. We're talking jiu-jitsu and the differences between jiu-jitsu and wrestling. So no wrestler in their right mind is going to be staying on two elbows here. But again, no wrestler in his right mind would stay on two elbows because they don't have to worry about defending strangles. So again, if I tried to do this when Placido was on two hands, I'm probably just gonna smack him with my butt in his face, right? But again, jiu-jitsu guys are pretty conservative. Placido might be thinking from his elbows of getting to a leg and pulling half guard. So we don't have the chin strap from here, but we're gonna double armpit grips. I can pop up and switch my legs and hop over the top. And again, we can do this because Placido is a jiu-jitsu guy and he's thinking more conservatively about not getting submitted rather than not losing position. So again, Placido's on two elbows. Don't try when on two hands or you're just gonna smack your butt into the head. Placido would probably like that, but your average training partner, probably not. So we're on top of here. I actually use like a push-up to come up and switch legs. So we've created, I'm not jumping and switching in the air. I switch and pull myself through. You can see we've landed perfect depth to get to the rear body lock. So again, that might not be something you're interested in. It might look unrealistic. But again, if we do that against the right opponent, do a particular defense, it will be effective. But again, you do it to the wrong person, someone that's going to be posting on hands, you're going to be causing a lot of trouble. All right, guys, let's talk about how to set up the anaconda choke from the front head. So I want to talk about the first time I saw this. And this is going back well over 10 years. So there used to be an MMA fighter, Renato Babalu Sobral, and he was actually a real big time contender in the UFC. He's basically a bit of an MMA legend, been retired for quite some time. But he was actually kicked out of the UFC after hitting this submission. So he fought an American guy called David Heath, who I believe didn't have much of a UFC career following this fight, but there was some bad blood and some animosity going in. The first round, they had a really bloody battle. So David Heath, just visually, I want you to think, covered in blood. He ate an elbow, he's pouring with blood. Second round, Babalu gets to the front head, he walks around, he sets up the anaconda choke, turns David Heath over, connects, and starts applying the submission. David Heath taps, and Babalu doesn't let go until he goes unconscious. So Babalu had a bit of a Pau Juarez moment there. So you see David Heath tapping, and Babalu, bad blood, some real Brazilian shit, holds it on. And afterwards in the post-match interview, Joe Rogan asked him if he deliberately held the submission. He said, yes, I held the submission because David Heath called me a motherfucker at the weigh-ins. So historical moment in the UFC. He was Babalu was kicked out of the UFC. I believe he suffered a suspension by the athletic commissions too. But it just imagine that. That's the first time I saw this submission. Set it up from front head, anaconda, guy's covered in blood, octagon's covered in blood, doesn't let go. So obviously, if you guys are UFC fans, you can go back, watch that, make sure I'm telling the full truth. I might have lost some details over the years, but yeah, distinctly remember this submission. Babalu hitting an excellent one that unfortunately ended in a pretty gruesome story for his UFC career. So when we're setting up this strangle, right, obviously we're going to be connecting our hands for this one. But what's key is that we don't allow Placido's elbow to come away from his neck, right? So when we strangle someone with an arm inside, we need to close the space with their own arm, basically own arm and own shoulder. We're trying to get this connection here. So Placido's ability to withdraw his elbow increases his ability to withstand this submission, right? So obviously we want to get that elbow as close to the head as possible initially, and ideally we want to maintain it. Although there's going to come a point in this where we do a bit of a leg assist to cinch the choke tighter. What's really best and all best for arm in submission is that once we tighten it, we never loosen to adjust. We might adjust our body positioning in relation to the grip, but the second we start trying to adjust these grips, a lot of the time people will take the top end, they'll try to relax to get this top hand tighter, and then they end up only being fingers deep on the bicep here. So for me, if I could say anything, if you guys remember anything throughout the sequences, once you lock it, don't make any adjustments to the grip unless you have a leg assist, something that's going to trap their elbow tight. So obviously, in terms of how we're controlling the front head, if I'm wanting to keep Placido in this position, I already am trying to pull this arm tight. And that's where we want it to be, basically, for this submission. So remember that setting up the anaconda out of this position is basically keeping good positioning. But instead, once we trap this arm close and we make space here, we are going to be letting go of the elbow to close our grips, right? And the hand that's the chin strap is going to go palm down. The hand that's on the elbow is going to go palm up. So we basically have these two grips and they transfer to this grip. Why do we do that? We do that because it's conducive to pulling Placido's elbow tight to his body. If we switched our grips and had the other palm up, now my elbow that's going to be trapping his elbow close to his head is going to be pointed in the wrong direction. So the chin strap hand goes on top, palm down, and the elbow block hand goes palm up. And you can see based on the angle here, that's going to be good at keeping the elbow tight. If I was doing it in the other direction, you can see my elbow's wide. That means Placido's elbow's wide. That means there's all this space here. And again, depending on what we're trying to do, because obviously sometimes we throw combinations of strangles, sometimes it is good to allow Placido to flare that elbow because it gives us space for other strangles, and that's sort of how we can throw combinations. But again, we want to do the anaconda. We want to have the grips correct. We want to make sure once we put him in that position, he doesn't have room to adjust and survive. And Placido, especially in training, very, very good at surviving anacondas, darces, anything with an arm in. So we've pulled this grip tight. Remember, we're going chin strap hand low, and we're securing here. And I'm pulling my elbow tight. My left elbow is doing its best to blocking his arm. But that's not necessarily enough. If I keep my ear on top of Placido's shoulder here, he can eventually overpower my arm and start pulling his elbow back. So I like to reinforce it with my right ear, basically putting my entire body weight there. Placido tries to retract the elbow. Very difficult. I try to bring my head underneath, and I start to walk underneath Placido to tip him over. So this is perfect here. We're both flat on our back. I'm going to lift my legs to the sky, and I'm going to drop the leg closest to Placido to the floor, and the leg furthest from Placido, it's going to catch his elbow. And that's how we use a leg assist to cinch our hands tighter. If I didn't have a leg assist here, and I just tried to take my right hand to my bicep, Placido's going to clear it every time. So look at this, right? We need a leg assist because as these come tighter, he strips the grips. So we have our grips, we have the leg assist, we feed our hands as deep as we can, and a good trick is just to run your arms together. Don't try to reach deep and then try to pummel. Try to keep that contact at all times. Because then say if we lose the leg assist, we're still tight here and we can seek to regain. If I have the leg assist, I open my hands to go tight and I lose the leg, we lose everything, right? So try to keep as much contact as possible. What the goal is with these grips, right, is I want my right hand as deep as possible. So the tighter my right hand is, the harder it's going to be for Placido to fight. This secondary hand that reaches up his back is secondary for a reason. It locks everything in place, but a lot of people misconstrue and they think that the secondary hand is more important than this one. So they'll have a shallow grip here to reach deep with the other hand, but you can already see the space around Placido's neck. We need the hand around the neck to be tight. So that reaches as tight as possible. The secondary hand then goes as far as possible without jeopardizing the depth of this hand. That's what I'd say is the most common mistake from this position is guys are so desperate to get the secondary hand tight that if you watch my right hand, the fingers start to become narrow. If the fingers are narrow here, the strangle's weak, and if Placido frames on my left elbow, he can actually break the grip. So the tighter my right hand is to my left bicep, if Placido tries to break the grip here, it's going to be very difficult. And then to complete, I'm not squeezing. I'm not going to hold this squeeze all day and fatigue myself. I walk into him and try to pump my chest forward, and we can get a tap. Again, if I just was like maybe in a heated role, I was angry with Placido, I just started squeezing, and that does happen very often. I would like to remind him. If I just start squeezing here, it's going to put pressure on his neck, but he's probably going to be able to survive it. If I make sure everything's perfect and I just gradually increase pressure, we're going to find that submission. But again, given Placido is very resilient for this position, the most common thing I have to do is a hip switch. So what we're going to do is we're going to spread our legs wide, and then my bottom leg comes forward, my top leg comes back. As I switch, I dive my forehead to the floor. And we come on top, and I hop foot to foot until I hop into mount. And now we've got control over his body, and I can add that rotationary pressure here to get the finish. But again, I would say at the highest level, you're going to have to finish from mount. Guys are going to be very, very resilient. And the reason we have to finish from mount is as we walk pressure into them, they match and walk distance with us. They prolong their ability to survive the strangle. When we come to mount, our legs are around their body. It'd be like having them in closed guard with the same grips. They can't just tough that out. Face this way. So again, controlling the elbow to make space. Chin strap hand, palm down, outside arm, palm up. And we use that to trap his arm. But again, we can't keep it here forever, so we need to use our head. Placido is trying to remove his arm. It's going to be difficult to beat both arms and my body weight of my head versus his one arm. We start to roll and walk underneath. It's Placido and me both on our back. From my back, I lift my legs in the air, lift my hips, and my top leg comes on top of Placido's elbow. We do this as a leg assist. Now when Placido is trying to pull his arm out, he has to beat that leg. You can even reinforce this by crossing your feet. So now when Placido pushes on my top leg, he's actually pushing on both legs. If it's just my top leg over the top, he could potentially overpower that. So a little trick I do is when I throw the top leg over, I cross my feet, because now when he pushes, it's both legs he's pushing against. And it gives us the time to reinforce this grip. Remember, it is the hand around the head that's the most important grip. We want that as deep as possible without jeopardizing the fingers when we replace it on the other side, right? So we keep our hands connected. Right hand as deep as possible, left hand as deep as possible. So arm around the neck as deep as we can get it, and then just finger crawl your other hand closer. But don't crawl it so far, it jeopardizes the strangle hand, because Placido is going to be able to frame and push out of that and strip our grip. But if we ensure that this one's super tight, the strangle hand, and this one just merely goes as far as it can, Placido tries to push, it's going to be overpowered from here. And again, we can finish with chest pressure, but Placido might keep walking. So we do our leg switch. Bottom leg extends, top leg retracts, switch legs and forehead dive to the floor. You won't get up unless you dive your forehead to the floor. Foot to foot, foot to foot, step to mount, and finish with rotation. So that's how we do the anaconda. But again, I thought I'd give you a bit of backstory to the first time I saw it. And I probably had an emotional reaction like you guys will when you watch it. It'll probably help you remember this technique. But yeah, very, very strong and very realistic at the highest level of competition. guys, let's look at the second variation of the anaconda entry from the front head. So obviously we have the first one where we did sort of the Olympic roll underneath to force them to go over. Sometimes that can be difficult on extremely strong athletic guys, especially wrestlers. But we have a second variation where we're going to get them to turn over, but basically through pressure on the neck, right? So what I'm trying to do with this one is we take our grips all the same, but really I'm going to be placing my leg on the back of Placido's head to force him to roll. Because again, no matter how strong Placido is, for him to resist this too hard is a risk of injury. So he has to take that into consideration when he's defending this. And really, most people are going to think, I'm going to go with the pressure, relieve the neck, defend it on the other end. So everything's the same as the first anaconda. Chin strap, we make that space, we close the grip. Again, we're closing the grip, chin strap, hand palm down, elbow grip, palm up, because that's going to keep a tight, cinched grip around his arm. If we did it in reverse, his elbow will be out of flow. And that's what's key in this. Again, elbow, head, ear connection, right? So chin strap, we pull it, we take our grips. I step next to his elbow like a knee block go behind, and I place my head and weight on top of his chest here, on top of his back. So my chest, back, weight, pressure here. I'm gonna step this leg on top of his head, and I'm gonna pull my hands into his neck here and sit back to my right hip. Placido rolls with the pressure because his neck is being forced to bend. And we can again catch legs high, hip high. We catch that secondary arm, and we can start thinking about crossing our feet for extra pressure here. Because again, if I just have one leg over the top and he pushes, he potentially could overpower, especially if there's a weight discrepancy. But overpowering both my legs with one of his arms, you'd have to have legs like Ethan Krallenstein to be overpowered from such a position. So what we're going to do from here, so once it's reinforced, we close the grip, just like in the first anaconda, and we can start applying hip pressure and chest pressure and walking in. So you see I'm walking into Placido here to collapse his neck into his head. I walk my feet in, and when my feet are in position, I apply chest pressure. If we're not making it happen because Placido's walking, I split my legs, lower leg goes towards his legs, upper leg back towards me, switch, and forehead drop. Again, the forehead drop is key because a lot of people ask me, how do we get up from here? And you have to place your head on the ground. We tripod, foot to foot, foot to foot, step to mount, and we get a much stronger finishing position. Sorry, Placido. Again, the key detail, right? If you're well practiced in the first anaconda entry, the only thing we're changing is how we get to that sort of attacking position where we can use the leg assist, right? So remember in the first one, we made space and we rolled our head underneath to Olympic roll to force him over. Now we're going to take advantage of the structural weakness of the neck to force him to do a forward roll. Basically, give him a dilemma of, do I want to injure my neck or do I want to roll to a position and keep the game going, right? So exact same grip, chin strap, elbow connection. We're going to have chin strap, hand palm down, elbow, hand palm up. Step in like you're doing a knee block and bring your weight over the top of his body here. Our outside leg steps on the back of his head and I sit and pull him over the top. From here, immediately lift your legs and hips and catch that arm, crossing your feet if you can, so he's fighting two legs instead of one. Take advantage of the knee assist to replace your grips. We're taking the strangle hand as deep as possible and the outside hand as deep as possible without jeopardizing that strangle grip. Strangle grip depth, more important than the other. We can walk into him here to get the finish, or we can do the leg switch and come over the top. And again, circular pressure to get the tap, and you guys will be able to squeeze that for minutes if we apply circular pressure. So I'm bringing my elbows together and lifting him to my left, right? lifting him away from the strangle hand. If we do it correctly, again, we could squeeze in forever. If we just try to explode and power into it, we might have some effect, but we might fatigue before we get the submission. Sometimes a clean strangle can take a few seconds. Some people don't have the energy to squeeze it 100% for even a few seconds. All right, guys, so obviously we have the 2 strangle setups from the anaconda position, and that involves the point at which we needed to use a leg assist to tie up the strangle. We can also take the back from there. And again, this one has sort of that unexpected feel to it, you know what I mean? Everyone knows that when we cinch up those anaconda grips from either position, they're expecting a strangle, but they're not expecting a back take from there. But rather, instead of catching the arm for the leg assist, if we sit up and throw the other leg in, it can become a hook, or it can go across body to somewhat of a mounted position to, again, either get the mount or to force a back take. If we land in the mount and they're flat on their back, we can use a half Nelson style scoop pressure. Some people refer to it as a 100% style position to force them to sit up. You know what I mean? Like, we can land in Placido's mount, and if we're behind the head, which we already are because of the nature of what we're attacking, we can simply switch that to a scoop and use that pressure to force Placido to sit up. It's not 100% a neck crank because he can choose to relieve it by sitting up, right? That's how we maintain safety with these neck style pressures, right? If I put Placido in a position of a neck crank where he can't relieve it, then that's probably pretty dangerous in terms of training, especially in a heated hard roll. But if we put him in a position where he can choose to accept neck crank pressure or a bad position, most human beings are going to accept a bad position. There are anomalies though. Nicky Rod would be one of those anomalies. So let's look at it from both anaconda setups, right? So let's go for the first one where we roll through. Instead of elevating hips and catching for the leg assist, we're going to elevate our hips and sit up to a mounted position. So as you can see here, Placido is flat on his back. We could potentially sit through to a seated katagatame and apply pressure here. If Placido rolls back, or if we wanted to attempt the back, which is a more high percentage technique, the arm around the neck can switch to this scoop grip. And you can see I could apply neck crank pressure to Placido, but if he sits up, he simply gives us the back take position here. So we'll look at it from the context of the second anaconda setup too, right? Because again, we land in the same position, just 2 different entries to the position. So we go exactly like a knee block go behind, but instead I sit on Placido's head and pull his shoulders over his neck, forcing him into this position. We could come up and hit the expected anaconda with a leg assisted, or we could sit up, come through to mount, and again, just like the last one, you can see based on the positioning of my hands, we could go for the seated katagatame and get some pressure here. Placido rolls back to the position we're in. We landed here. We can take the hand around the neck as a scoop. So you see here, Placido remained here. I could apply neck pressure. I could apply pressure to his neck in a cranking manner. But if he sits up, he just gives us the back, and we can reinforce this grip, come around for seatbelt pressure, control the wrist, and sit to the far hip. So again, although I'm showing you from both entries, it is possible from both entries. Just remember, then anytime you were to end up in that position, we could throw an unorthodox attack like this. So although this isn't a dilemma-based thing, we're in a neutral position where we have both options available to us. One has the element of surprise. Again, if I hit Placido with this back take, now from that position, he has two things to worry about now. Whereas ordinarily, when we're threatening only anaconda strangles, he only had one thing to worry about. So we look at it one more time, right? We got the chin strap, we roll through. Placido lands here. Again, instead of lifting and falling onto my right hip, I lift and backwards roll to the front hip. See how Placido sat up there? Sometimes that'll happen. He naturally sits up and we can just take the back. Or if he's remaining hesitant here, we take the chin strap hand and dive it under his underhook here. Now when we apply neck crank pressure, Placido sits up, brings his hips back. We take an underhook and we can land ready to attack the neck. All right, guys, let's talk about the Peruvian necktie. So the Peruvian necktie is a submission, obviously, from front head, as just demonstrated, but it is a low percentage submission. I'm going to try to explain why without offending people that are big fans of the Peruvian necktie. So let's say we're attacking front head, we're going for high wrist. We've got the option to go high wrist, go behind, back to high wrist, even different variations of guillotine. Even in terms of, say we set up some anaconda chokes, when we set those up, we still ended up in positions where other battles could take place and there are other options presented to us that could progress our position based on their defensive movements. The Peruvian necktie is kind of limited in that sense. I'm really putting all my eggs in one basket there. Generally speaking, you miss a Peruvian necktie, your opponent escapes and is on top. So I mean, in that sense, in the fact that it's sort of a surprise technique, it might be useful to know maybe when a match times are on an hour, maybe down on points, you need a sort of a Hail Mary technique, but I wouldn't put it at the forefront of your game because again, it's not part of a system. There's no dilemma really in that sequence to set up, you know what I mean? You miss it, you missed it. But yeah, either way, we're gonna teach how to do it. I'm also gonna show how it potentially could lead to other submissions, but I still don't want you to think that like, oh, I get to the front head, I go for the Peruvian necktie. Everything else we've done is part of a system. And again, with dilemmas, for this is a standalone technique. So let's talk about the Peruvian necktie, right? So we've got our front head position. I'm doing everything the same. Again, I'm making space between his elbow and knee here to place my knee as close to inside as possible. The grips I'm taking with my hands, just like this. So rather than a palm to palm gable style grip where we're using this grip to isolate the elbow here, I'm just holding wrist to one wrist. So basically just covering one wrist and the other one's floating. That really gives me a good pulling motion here. Whereas palm to palm, you can see it's going to be tight at the elbow, but it's going to be loose around the grip itself. Here, I can switch it and then I can pull the sharp end of my forearm into that throat. Because what we're basically doing with the Peruvian, I'm placing a grip under his neck and arm and I'm using my leg to collapse his neck. So in a way, it's similar to one of our anaconda setups, but because we're throwing a secondary leg over the back, Placido doesn't have the ability to roll through. So if you remember, when we did the anaconda, we did a palm to palm. I sat on his head to get him moving, but I didn't throw the secondary leg over, which would limit his move. I allowed him to roll to start cinching up the anaconda, or of course, we had the back take from that position. For this one, I'm just taking a different style wrist grip. I'm throwing my leg over, and as I sit back, I throw the second leg over his back. I'm falling to an outside hip. I'm pulling my hands into his throat, and I'm extending my leg into the back of his head. And that's how we're going to get the submission here. So I'm not going to pretend to think that this is some highly technical submission. It's just really a tight grip where the forearm is into the throat, the sharp end of the forearm. Obviously, this is going to be more dull at making a connection to his throat here. My leg is going to collapse his neck, and with the combination of the pulling pressure of the arms, we're creating a strangle-like pressure. And again, to get the second leg over the back is going to create that connection that Placido can't easily roll out of. So again, we make the space for the grip for our knee to try to place it inside. Instead of palm to palm, I'm just grabbing my wrist. So we sit inside as best we can. I throw my leg over his head, and as Placido starts to go to roll, that leg is replaced there. And see, it comes on very quick there, but I want you to essentially imagine pulling, and I'm extending this leg into Placido here. But let's talk about some of the challenges to this position, right? So even in terms of the anaconda, when we're dealing with slippery, explosive opponents, it can be tricky to get one leg over the back of their head. But this move is relying on two legs going over the back of the head. So when we come in, I have to get my right leg over, which again, like I said, in explaining the context of the task, can be difficult, and get a second leg over the top to get this position. So in that sense, we are really asking for a lot in this position, and in my opinion, we are doing a high risk movement. But then in terms of defense, Placido's ability to defend is actually quite strong because we're committing two hands to the strangle, but Placido's left arm is going to be free throughout this exchange. So Placido knows that basically what he needs to clear, what he needs to prevent is either the second leg going over the back, allows him to roll through, or he needs to clear the leg off the back of the head. Obviously, it's going to be very difficult for him to hand fight in a meaningful way here, especially because it's going to be two hands of mine against one hand of his. So if we look at the weakest links in the chain, it'd be roll before I get the leg over the back, or to be when he's deep in the submission, just try and strip the leg over the back of the head, which is going to be his most realistic defense route. So even if we get everything perfect, it's very difficult for me to deal with what Placido's doing there. If we come back a step, even if this one is dead to rights tight, Placido is still able to find that foot and start popping his head out. So that's the challenge there, right? And again, the Peruvian is going to work well against people that are unfamiliar to these areas, because when you're unfamiliar in a position, you have a panic response. Placido were to remain calm, he'd easily find that foot to defend. Placido's panicking, freaking out, which is the worst thing you could do when you're in trouble. He's probably realistically going to try to fight the strangle. He's not going to be able to break those grips. That's a very strong grip, and he's going to get submitted. But if he's calm and he understands the position, he's going to understand that that's the leg he needs to deal with. So in that sense, I believe the Peruvian, kind of a weak technique in and of itself, because it's not part of the system. We can't create a dilemma with it. But I will say we can sort of improvise to try to maintain some danger throughout his defense here. And I'd say the best way to do that would be to try to switch to a seated katagatame. But again, seated katagatame, I would think falls into a similar basket to the Peruvian in a sense that it's quite easy to defend. But the benefit of the seated katagatame is the defense gives us something better. I won't say the defense to Peruvian gives us something better to the same extent as the seated katagatame. So let's see how we can get the seated katagatame from a failed Peruvian necktie. So when we land in this position and Placido pops his head out, we do have a chance to pull his right arm cross body, and we could start getting a finish here. So we still have the seated karagatame. We could attempt out of a failed Peruvian. And again, we know how Placido's going to defend the karagatame. If he stays here, all I need to do is pull my elbow to my left hip and we start applying pressure. He knows if he turns to expose his back, he creates space between his elbow and his throat, removing the pressure on the carotid artery, and I can't apply pressure here. But he is giving us the back. So I will say there is a sequence within this technique, although in my opinion a weak technique, we do have sort of a chance at maintaining. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be like this would be my preferred option from this position. I'm just saying the limitations of the Peruvian and what we could potentially try to save it with. So we're throwing ourselves into position. Placido pops his head out. I use my grip to pull his arm across and pummel both hands a little deeper. I pull my elbow to my hip. We start to apply pressure. We get that seated karagatame. But again, it's not a difficult one to defend. Just expose your back. You take a scoop grip on the far side. We start getting a body triangle and securing an underhook to have a good chance at taking the back. So then we have Peruvian necktie, and obviously we discuss the strengths and weaknesses of attempting something like that, sort of trying to get you to imagine a situation which it would be feasible, realistic to go for it. And then again, it is quite simple to defend. And if they defend, we do have another sort of Hail Mary sort of shot at a seated karagatame. And again, if they escape that, we go back to the back.
All right, so now we're going to be looking at attacking the darce against a turtled opponent. Okay, so we've already been through a variety of different attacks on our opponent, ranging from the anaconda to the Peruvian necktie, as well as the high wrist. And now we're going to add in a darce for the arsenal. So opponent's going to be in a turtle position. Now, as we've already seen, anytime that we can break our opponent down to less athletic positions, it will be favorable for us. One of the biggest mistakes, perhaps, that you've seen in the gym is when people start going for darces against a opponent who's still turtled. And if I start going for a darce on an opponent who's still turtled, it's going to be incredibly difficult for me to finish that darce. All right. So goal number one when we want to start attacking a darce on a turtle opponent is get the man down. Okay. So how are we going to do that? We're going to be here in our front headlock position. From here, I'm going to go through and I'm going to change my split squat from a left knee split squat to a right knee split squat. From here, I take my right hand. From here, I take my right hand and I shoot my right hand through and under my opponent's left side armpit, like so. I want you to notice the change in my split squat stance. I don't stay on my left knee and try to shoot the right arm through. I switch from a left knee split squat to a right knee split squat, like so. Okay? Now, I'm just disconnecting my hands just as a form of illustration, but typically I don't want to withdraw my left hand. I just go in like so, and I take my right hand and I create an S grip. Okay? With this S grip, now I'm going to switch my split squat again from a right knee split squat to a left knee split squat. And now I use the control I have on my opponent's neck to bring his head under his armpit. With my drive leg, I bring his head under his armpit, and now I successfully break him down to a hip. Okay? Now, from here, if you have a very athletic opponent or an opponent who typically wrestles at a high level, he's going to be looking to get back off his hip. Okay? So a lot of times what will happen here is if you break somebody down, they'll just initially pop right back up to their hip, and you're back to square one. Okay? So a very important detail here is when I break my opponent down, you want to make sure you cover the hips. So I'm in an S grip. From here, I take a bladed stance and I walk my hip just over my opponent's hip. So as he tries to get up, we can ride out that wave of resistance, okay? Now, it's not realistic for me to finish the entire darce with my hips over his hips, okay? So we just want to chill here while we ride out the initial wave of resistance. And then once we ride out the initial wave of resistance, we can start to proceed with our darce, okay? When I look to proceed with my darce, the whole key is going to be the depth of the strangle arm, okay? If you have a shallow strangle arm, it's going to be a weak darce. A deep strangle arm is going to be a deep darce, okay? So in order to achieve that, we have to shift our ear from the back of our opponent's shoulder towards the lat muscle like so. Notice, I didn't disconnect my hands. I take my hands from the back of the shoulder to the lat like so, okay? Now from here, without disconnecting my hands, I shift my hands down my opponent's spine like so, and now from here, I slide it in to my figure 4 grip. The key to finishing from this point is to make my secondary hand high, okay? So I want to take my secondary hand and bring my secondary hand and hide it on my opponent's shoulder. Notice you can't see my secondary hand, okay? It's hidden. If you can see your secondary hand, it's going to be a much weaker darce. If you can hide your secondary hand, that's going to tighten up the darce strangle much more. From here, we step up, we cover our opponent's hip with a knee on belly variation or tripod and come into a full mount. And from here, it's just a simple drawing of the elbow and we finish our opponent like so, okay? So one more time from a different angle. Let's go this way. Okay, we're here in a front headlock position. From here, I switch to a right knee split squat. From a right knee split squat, I slide through with my S grip. I switch back to a left knee split squat. From a left knee split squat, I take my opponent's head under his armpit. I cover his hips. He tries to come back up, he can't. From here, I shift and I make sure my shoulder shoots under his armpit. From here, I slide my hands down to the spine and I slide into a figure 4 grip, okay? Notice when I slid into my figure 4 grip, I changed from a right knee split squat back to a left knee split squat. What you're starting to notice here is the theme of having to switch from split squat to split squat, okay? It's important that you understand and recognize that switching from split squat to split squat is important in order for you to successfully complete the darce, okay? So from here, once I slide into a figure 4, I make sure I slide my hand up to my opponent's deltoid, okay? The higher the secondary hand, the tighter the darce will be. I cover my secondary hand with my chin. Now from here, I slide my knee up into a knee on belly. Or if you want to go further, we can post our head on the mat like so. Come through, mount our opponent, and then from here, draw the right elbow through for the finish.